All right. Thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston, and I talk to amazing people who are doing things to empower other people by sharing their story. And I'm going to have my guest introduce herself to you all.
I am really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Danielle Moodie, and I am a political strategist and the host of Woke AF Daily and co-host of Democracy-ish podcasts.
Thank you for being here. And one of the things for you and my audience, when I started this podcast in 2018, I was like, I just want to talk about mental health and wanted to talk about like the different things, depression, anxiety. Over the last few years, it feels like everything is mixing together. Like mental health is involved in everything that's going on. So it's been really interesting. And I've never had anyone like you who is involved in politics the way you are, very unapologetic. I can only imagine the amount of hate emails and mails you get. I can only imagine. But before we learn about where you are now, I would love to learn a little bit about your upbringing because you're in a unique position, being a Black woman who is on these people's necks.
I mean, I
uh,
try. I appreciate that. I try.
so where were you raised at?
Sure. So I'm originally from Long Island, New York. So I was raised out in a suburbs, which is roughly 96% white,
Oh.
where I was raised. Child of immigrants. My family is from Jamaica and came to the United States in I think around 1970. And they came to the United States like most people come to the United States because they wanted a better life, better opportunities for the family. And when my mother, I'm also a child of divorce, so when my mother decided to uh, move out east to Long Island, she's a little about 30 minutes away from the rest of the family. She did so because she wanted to move to the place that had the best school district that she could afford to live in, because that's the
Yeah.
kind of situations that we put families in the United States in, where we don't just have good schools, right? It's based on your tax bracket, it's based on your property tax. And so my mother moved to an area that had at the time a really great public school. But by virtue of doing so, my sister and I were one of just a handful of Black kids, a handful of kids of color that were in the school. So that came with its own mixed bag, but a decision that she made that I think set me on the path that I'm on now.
When you were in school, because I'm in Boston, we have a program called the MECO program, where if you get in, you can go to a good school, but you're bussed out in an area where there's mostly people that don't look like you. Was that ever an experience do you remember being hard when you look back at some of the microaggressions that were probably taking place?
It's funny because it wasn't until I actually went into a grad school program for early childhood education, which is what I have my master's in. And when I went into that program, the purpose of it was to kind of unpack your own bias, right? So that you didn't bring it into the classroom, because we were being educated in a way that we were going to be in classrooms with largely children of immigrants or undocumented people. And so it's like, what are the ways in which you were educated that you want to take into the classroom with you? And what are the ways in which you were educated that you don't want to bring in to the classroom with you? And it was through that experience, that 2-year experience, that I realized that I had experienced a lot, of not, I wouldn't say a lot of racism, but I experienced different flashpoints, different friction points that I think, as a young person at that time, you just want to be accepted. So you kind of just, go with the flow. But it was like through the grad school kind of reflection period that I realized, I was like, oh, that's right. You were called, the N word at 16, in your AP history class. You were, kids laughed when you went to a swim party and your hair kinked up, unlike the white girls who jumped in the pool. You were called, Aunt Jemima for wearing like a red beret, to
Yeah.
school in the wintertime. Like things like that, I began to kind of realize that they had they had really colored my experience on what it meant to be one of the only ones, right? And to grow up in a way where you were the only one, and by virtue of that became, an ambassador of sorts, right? Because I would recognize, and I would later give up that title, but I would recognize, as a young person, that like I may be the only Black person that these people ever meet, right? And so, so what does it mean to have that experience be both a teachable one, but also one that kind of sets them away from the path of racism, which was just so readily available.
Wow, you took that on. You remember taking that on as a young age
Yeah.
of. Oh, did you ever feel like you minimized yourself or try to?
No, the funny thing
Oh,
is that I actually was always, acculturated into taking up space. And so, I
nice.
mean, that's just by virtue of, my parents, and, and my upbringing was that like my family came here, right, to make a life. They didn't come here so that I would shrink. So anytime that I had an opportunity to take up space, I would, which meant, going and running for student body. It meant, you know,
Wow.
uh, it meant taking on the school board and telling them that the civics curriculum was racist.
Re-
And having someone say to me on the phone, well, we think that the curriculum is very inclusive. And me saying, well, as a Black girl in this school, I don't think so. And they said, oh, you're Black? Because we were on the phone. And I said, yes, what did you think that I was? Right? Because your idea of articulation of words somehow seems different depending on the
Right.
level of melanin. So I think that for me, it wasn't ever a shrinking time because I was the only one. It was the time to be like, oh, you will remember me.
Wow.
And that's
Wow.
kind of how like I set up my, myself.
Yeah, your psyche, it makes a lot of sense. Like who you are now is basically who you were raised to be. Uh right? So blame your mama.
Right.
So now you're in college, you go to school
Mhm.
for early education. When did you start to get into politics?
So when I go to college, so my early childhood is in my master's degree. When I went to college, I went for political science.
Okay.
So my undergraduate degree is in political science, and it was because my senior year of high school, I had an amazing AP advanced placement government and politics teacher who I believe at the time, like upon reflection, also she was a communist, and believed in, community building, believed that like all people should have. And the way that I learned about government and the way that I learned about comparative government, where we were looking at parliament versus UK parliament versus the United States, I wanted to be a part of something. I wanted to be a part of making this country better. It sounds naive now given where the hell we are, but when I was young, getting ready to go to college, I wanted to be, I wanted to be on Capitol Hill. I wanted to, be a part of what it meant to expand, our republic and our democracy. And it was that kind of being turned on to politics at a young age, and feeling like I could do it. So I
Mhm.
would leave New York, and I would go down to the Washington, D.C. metro area, where I went to undergraduate school at Marymount University and major in political science, and learn all the ways in which I ended up not wanting to intern on Capitol Hill I because I was just like, so I don't know what you all are doing, but what I do know is that I would actually like to work for a movement organization that is on the outside kind of pushing government. So I wouldn't get into working on the Hill until later in my career. But in the earlier parts, I went and I wanted to be a part of the women's movement. So I interned at the National Organization for Women
Mhm.
now, at that time. And then I also realized through that, wow, the women's movement is really racist and homophobic. So you thought you were going into one space where you're like, we're fighting for, equity. And then they're like, oh, but not that much equity. Like, sit down.
Slow down.
Right. Slow
down.
down. Right. Like when we're talking about women, we're talking about, big W, not you Black women. Sit down. Not you gay women. Shut up. So that, so that was wild. And but I think like through all of it, I still had this very this kind of love affair with wanting to be a part of what it meant to perfect this very imperfect union. So I would take like a real, windy road into getting to the work that I do now.
Right, lobbyist at one point,
Yes.
and that lasted for a little bit. Did you get burnt out?
No, I didn't get burned out. It's, I would work in a classroom. So I would leave undergraduate, I would go to grad school, get my master's in early childhood education, knowing that I wanted to do education policy. I'm a true believer that education is the great equalizer, and it's why you're seeing the attacks on critical race theory, the attacks on education and book banning that you're seeing, because the more educated people become, the more questions that they will have, the more of a critique that they will make. And then all of a sudden they're not as easy to control. So for me, I wanted to, to be a part of educating the next, group of global citizens. And so I went and I worked as a first and second grade teacher and special education teacher. And then I went and became, was accepted into the Congressional Black Caucus's fellowship program, which got me to the Hill to work for Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. And she at the time was the only member that was from New York that was sitting on the Education and Labor Committee in the House. And she was the only member from New York. New York has the largest school district in the country, right? New York City. At well over 1 million students. So it was really important to me to want to work with her, because any policy that we would, create would essentially affect the entirety of the country. And that was really what I wanted to do. And then after that, that fellowship ended after a year. I would become one of the lead lobbyists for the city of New York under Mayor Bloomberg when he was the mayor. For a couple of years, and then would lobby for the National Wildlife Federation and do environmental education policy to connect kids with nature and to get them outside, because that was a time of increased testing under George W. Bush, where No Child Left Behind, if folks remember, was big into the news. And so it was like, oh, kids don't need recess and they don't need fun. They just need to sit in and fill in bubbles all day. And it's about standardized testing. So I went on the defense and said, well, actually, if we don't have that downtime, if we don't have the time for creativity, music, art outside, I don't, like, you're not understanding how children's brains develop and how people develop, how humans develop. So I would lobby for a while for them to push on that behalf.
Did you ever feel like you seem like you've always been passionate your entire life? Did you ever feel like a lone wolf out there doing this work?
Yeah, I did. I go through moments, and I think it's because sometimes I feel like people are very narrowed in how they understand the world to be. And for me, I really wanted, when I think about education, I still think about myself as an educator. I think about the ways in which we leave so much potential on the cutting room floor just based on the way people look, based on where they live, based on how much or how little money they have in their bank accounts. We don't have a caste system in the United States, in one that is pronounced, but we have real economic caste systems. We have racialized caste systems. And so, when even at the National Wildlife Federation, there were people that were there because, they really believe in saving trees and saving animals. And I'm like, I believe in saving people. So if we're not engaging people and recognizing that the environment is a place that you live in, not something that you go to, then I don't understand how you think you're going to galvanize people to want to save animals when you're not even trying to save children. Right. So it will there would be like sometimes, disconnects in places that I would show up, because they could not see the forest through the trees.
Yeah. Stop.
So, it's the truth.
So okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think about all of your passion, and now you are still an educator because you're educating people um about the things that are going on. I when I went to get my master's and I was in Africana studies was the first time I felt like I understood America differently, and that's pretty sad because I was about 22, and that was around the time the Trayvon Martin stuff was happening, and
Wow.
growing up in the hood and being around other people that look like you in the same socioeconomic status as you, you really don't know racism is existing. On just my honest point of view from my experience, and it's interesting because from that class and then the things that started happening in the media, I realized like I'm not better off. But when the history books start me off as a slave and I'm no longer a slave, I feel like I'm better than being a slave. But looking at all the systems where they've kept us down, now, sometimes I wonder if I'd known about this before, would I have kept going, or would I felt like I was a victim, or would that have excelled me to like push further? But I was very ignorant to it. And so like my goal is to continue to educate people so that they can empower themselves
Yeah.
and not fall victim to the systems in America. Even just as a therapist in school, they didn't talk about racism being or the impact of society and how that can impact people's mental health. They make it all chemical. And when there's so many other factors that are leading to where we are now. But speaking of where we are now, tell people a little bit about your podcast and what you are doing, because in case people don't know who you are on social media and on TV to educate people.
Yeah. So, after I spent a couple of years lobbying, this was at the same time when marriage equality was having a
Mm.
big time in the news, and when marriage equality was not the law of the land, as it kind of is right now.
Mhm.
But I started venturing into television at that time in,
Mhm.
being asked, I'm since divorced, but being asked, to go on television as a spokesperson for marriage equality as a Black queer woman, because at that time it was only white gay men who don't invoke empathy that were getting on television to rah 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 talking about how they need their rights, right, and how they're oppressed, and we're like, sit down. um so um so through that, through going on TV to talk about LGBTQ equality and work,
Mm.
I realized that they're, living at the intersection of multiple identities, being a Black woman, being a queer woman, being a child of immigrants, all of these things, that there was nobody that looked like me that was talking to people, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was only, maybe one or two people that were on television that were Black women with any type of weight or platform. And so initially I started, of the first podcast with my ex-wife, back in the early 2000s. And then it would be my move to New York, my move back to New York would coincide with Donald Trump becoming the Republican nominee. And I came to New York and, was asked, saying, hey, we see you on TV all the time. Now you're considered a Democratic strategist. You talk about more than just LGBTQ equality. What do you think about having a radio show? And I said yes. And so, Woke AF was born from the fact that if Donald Trump could become the Republican nominee and could eventually become president of the United States, that meant that more than half of the country was asleep, right? That meant that more than half of the
Mm.
country was living in some type of fantasy land where we all believed, because of the Obama years, that America was better than it was.
Yeah.
And so I named the show Woke AF because I wanted to be an alarm clock, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't, being a citizen of these United States is not a passive thing. It takes actual vigilance. It takes, actual work. And the work isn't just in voting every 4 years. The work is voting every time that there is an election, whether it is at your school board, your city council, your state house or for president of the United States. And it's holding those people accountable, right? Because they are depending on your ignorance. They are depending on you being distracted by your day-to-day life, that you don't pay attention to the fact that they're no longer beholden to you, that they're beholden to the big dollar donors, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much money in politics. And so, for me, it was like Donald Trump, and I said this on election night on national television in Canada, and that moment actually went viral, where it was, and Donald Trump won Florida, and the newscaster looks at me and says, "Danielle, what does this mean?"
White
And I was
supremacy.
and I said, "It's white supremacy's last stand." And I said, "I got nothing left to lose, so let me tell the truth." And I said it just like that, because I was like, "This may be my last time on television, right?" And so I'm gonna say what this is. And it was the first time, after years of doing TV, that I wasn't trying to fit into other people's ideas or molds or say the right thing. I was just like, no, I'm going to say the truth. And the truth is that America is a white supremacist country. America was founded on white supremacy, patriarchy. So a man that can, say that he can grab a woman by anywhere, a man that can come down an escalator talking about Mexicans being rapists and all of these things and win, shows you exactly who America is. The reason why we're here is because of a backlash, because a Black man had the audacity to think that he could become president of the United States. That's why we're experiencing this moment. And so, Woke AF and my rage came out of America's ignorance, America being sold the idea that we are better people than we are. And the reality is that white people are not better than they think that they are, right? And that is why, I try every day, 5 days a week on Woke AF to bring people the news in a way that cuts through the BS, that cuts through the lies and the light jokes, and is like the mockumentary Don't Look Up, right? It is like everything isn't smiles and and niceties. Like, you all should be angry, you should be mad, you should feel scared, right? And if that is what it takes to motivate you, then let me be that alarm.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's good. And it's a really great podcast. I listened to it. And what I was one of the ignorant people who only knew to vote during the presidency. I never knew about the local government and how that mattered. I know now. But do you think socio-economic status and just like trying to survive life has a lot to do with why sometimes people go ahead?
Absolutely. I think that, we have to understand that there are, and you had mentioned this earlier, there are major systems at play, right? So if people's basic needs are not met, and what are your basic needs? The ability to put food on your table, the ability to have a table to put that food on, and a home, right? In order to do that, the ability to clothe yourself, right? The ability to live, with your more than just your head above water. If you are struggling, right? If you are left in that struggle situation by virtue of the systems that are there to keep you in that place, then you don't have time. Time is a luxury, right? The idea to think about how you can participate and make the world a better place is a luxury. And if all you have seen is government beat your people down, then why would you think that your participation in said government would make it better? This is all purposeful, right? And so, I think that there is a reason why you're seeing inflation go up, but you're not seeing the minimum wage go up. There's a reason why they're overturning Roe v. Wade to take women and people with uteruses out of the workforce so that you have to struggle, right? Because if everyone is struggling, then those 1% are able to run roughshod over the entire country. Because I no longer have the ability to think about what you're doing, because I'm thinking about surviving. So what I want people to understand is that to move from that survival space, we have to have people that are going to represent our best interests and hold those people to account. And if you see nobody around you that is going to be that voice, then you be that voice, right? You don't need to have nobody's law degree, doctoral degree, or any goddamn thing, right? In order to run for office, you need passion and you need focus, right? And by virtue of social media these days, you can find ways in which to raise money, right? Because the bad thing is that it does take a lot of money.
It does
to run, to run for office. But the fact is that, I don't even want you to even own the fact that you say like, oh, I was ignorant to this. Your ignorance was made purposeful by the fact that we don't teach civics in school, right? Like your public education should have afforded everyone in this country the ability to understand how government works at the state, local levels. But you see, if you do that, if you have robust civics, if you have robust financial literacy in schools, then guess what? Right? You start to become an independent whole person that now is not reliant on those people that are saying, that have put themselves on a pedestal and are saying that, oh no, we know how to make things work. So you give all of your, confidence and support to us. No, now all of a sudden you recognize that you're the one with the keys to your own success, and that they are not the ones that are dangling those keys in front of you and you hoping and begging and just being grateful for the job that you have. You start asking for more. Right. So it is. So when people say like, I didn't know X, Y, and Z, it's like, because we don't build curriculum in this country for you to know X, Y, and Z. You need to have the fortitude to want to do that on your own. And if we're again talking about survival, how many people have the time and the ability to go do that on their own?
No, you're right. I appreciate you saying that. And as for people listening, whether we're talking about financial literacy or social emotional, all these things that we may not have been taught, like it's okay to ask questions and do your research. I'm a big person that truly believes in being mindful of the inner voice that we have with ourselves. So for you to change that language is actually pretty dope, because that's something I probably would have did to someone else. When there's so many systems at play that it's not by accident that this is happening, where we don't understand. And what would you say to people who say like we're in this position because people aren't voting? I feel like more people are voting now.
Yeah, it's a lie.
Okay.
More people voted in the last presidential election than have ever voted in the United States. Now, that was only 60% of the vote. There are 40% of the population that can vote that doesn't. But to say that, oh, people are not voting, that's just not the truth. Black women vote more than everybody else, right? And consistently show up at the polls. So it isn't about the fact that people don't vote. It is about the fact that we have made voting almost damn near impossible in some red states in this country, right? It's the fact that we've made voting in some places dangerous, right, in this country. So, I can't stand when people say, oh, well, you just need to vote, because it's not just voting. It isn't just pulling the lever and then thinking that all is going to be well, right? We have a razor thin majority right now in the Senate because we need more Democratic senators, because the ones that pretend that they're Democrats right now aren't doing anything for the people, right? They're only doing things for their own pockets. So, I believe in telling people, yes, that you need to vote, but the idea that there aren't enough people voting is just not the truth.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. That's good. Today it's 2022. So I listened to her podcast. She broke her toe and you haven't been able to work out. I get to talk to the person I listen to. This is so cool. How are you doing? Because, one of the things that I've struggled with depression over the years, and one of the things that helps me is working out. And so I had an ankle injury and I couldn't work out, and I felt like the heaviness was coming over me. And I know you recently worked out today.
I did. Oh my God. Yes, I did. I did work out today for the first time in over 2 months. And I did it seated because I still have the boot on my foot. But funny enough, I was away with friends over this past weekend. And one of my best friends, she said to me, Danielle, I'm noticing that you are really tense, right? Like you are really, just tense in a way that I haven't seen you in a while. And I know that I go on long walks and, and I love boxing, shadow boxing and exercise. And she's just like, I know that your foot, you really hurt your toe. And so you can't do the things that you've normally done. But I really think that you need to find a way to work out, because I'm noticing how it's showing up. Right.
I was going to say that to you today too.
Yeah. In your emotional self. And I sat there and I was like, damn. Right. Like, oh, I really need to do something, because it isn't okay to just, again, it's an injury. It happens and it sucks. But it was just like, no, today I did shadow boxing. I sat down and did it. I got on, my mat. I did some ab work, and I felt almost like a weighted blanket had been lifted off of me. I felt so much better. And I said, man, I could have been doing this for the last 2 months, but it doesn't matter. I'm doing it now.
Yes.
But that, I recognize that a big part of my ability to continue to do work that is so exhausting and at times really emotionally debilitating, that I can't let go of the tools that I have built up that help me keep balanced in the best way that I can.
Yeah, so that's your medicine for living, right? Like being able to work out, it's like important. So I mean, prior to the toe injury, you feel like, I mean, I know you're developing your systems again. Do you feel like you have pretty good systems? Because I think about people like you. I'm in the mental health world. You're in the political world where there's so much unrest, and I think about our mental health and how we have this passion to educate people about mental health, about politics, about empowerment and different capacities. But I wonder, like, how do you continue to do this and be okay?
I have a really wonderful network of friends,
Nice.
and my family is really strong. But it was really during the beginning of the pandemic, where everything was, shut down. And I was with my family out on Long Island. And I started walking because I just needed to get the hell out of the house, like so many people did. And I had been a runner in previous lives, but you run too long and you got bad knees, and I needed to let that go. But I started walking, and I realized that, like, walking was a really wonderful meditation. Like, just to be outside, to not think about anything, to take in my surroundings, the trees, the birds, the grass, like just being able to take that in and take in the breath. I also started a regular meditation practice in 2020. My mother and my sister are both yoga teachers. My mother owns a yoga studio on Long Island, and they had always talked to me about meditation. I was like, yeah, that's just not for me. It's not for me. I would say those things. And then during, the pandemic, I was just like, well, this ain't for me either. So I need to do something, because I feel like I'm losing my goddamn mind. So I started a regular, guided meditation practice twice a day. So it was between the working out, meditation, and then reaching out to my own community and tribe that I have built up, to make sure that I'm sane. Like, my friends will tell me, okay, so turn off the news. So get off of social media. So take a break. When are you taking time for yourself? And they will be that constant reminder. And I think that that's important. It's important to figure out what works for you. If you see behind me, I also became a really
plant mom,
aggressive plant mom. And I have like over
aggressive is a strong word. You have that many?
Well, I have over 30 plants in my home. So
it's aggressive.
It's like, so it's aggressive. So it's aggressive. But I love it.
Thank you for sharing. I always, my goal at the podcast is to help give people hope, and it sounds like you're trying to create balance. Community is important, and I want to stress to people who may not have a tribe or community is to find that community. I tell people, when I was struggling with infertility, I went on Twitter and found a community. When I took in my son who was autistic, I went and found autism moms. So like, I didn't have people in my personal life, but one thing that I've recognized is like when there's people that look like you or going through some of the similar things, and you hear their story, you have hope. And so like when I was struggling in different areas of my life and I was able to find that tribe, and it wasn't people I knew in real life, I found myself having hope and having a community. And especially now with everything that's going on, community is important. And it's but I was, how you said you was naive when you thought you was going to change the world. I was like, oh, I'm going to change what mental health looks like. And now I'm like, we can't catch a break. There's just so much stuff happening. Am I going to be able to do it?
You know what I realized is that, like, I cannot change the world. I can only
know.
change the people that I come into contact with, and recognize
Exactly.
that by virtue of living the life the way that I want to, unapologetically,
Yeah.
and out loud, is the way to be a guide and a blueprint for other people. I'm not perfect. And I don't think that any of this is about perfection. I do think that it is modeling what it means to exist in spaces where there was no space for us and you
Yeah.
created your own, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, I think that, I always say on my show, that, like, I don't have even a mustard seed of hope. But if I was as hopeless as I say that I was, I wouldn't do what I do. I would have
For
given up
facts.
I would have given up a
Facts.
long time ago. I'm probably one of the most hopeful people, right?
Yeah.
Because I continue to bang my head against the wall of our democracy.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just, people need to recognize you do not need a degree. You do
Nope.
not need a certain amount of money to take up space. You should be able to
Yes.
take up space by virtue of the fact that you are a human being and you are living, right? And that is what you are owed.
Yes. Oh, that's a good word to end on. I love that. And I'm big on letting people know it doesn't matter, and we can educate ourselves. In fact, I've been more educated outside of school, learning about stuff on
100%.
my own. So Danielle, thank you so much. People, where can they find you? So woke as fuck or AF is
Yes,
everywhere.
is everywhere,
Uh,
wherever you get your
uh-huh.
podcasts. I am on all over social media, so you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at D2Cents, DEETWOCENTS. And I am newly on TikTok at Danielle Moodie _. So you can get at me there as well.
Check you out trying to join the kids.
Yeah, let me tell you something. If you think that I'm lit on the podcast,
I know.
check me out on TikTok. That is really no holds barred.